Welcome to XRP Pro Ledger, and today we are going deep on the price framework that has generated more debate in this community than any other, and we are going to decode it properly, with the data that exists in 2026, not the data that existed when the framework was originally developed. The Shane Ellis institutional liquidity theory. Most people in this community either dismiss it as fantasy or embrace it without understanding the mathematics that produces its conclusions. And neither response serves you as well as actually engaging with the logic, because the logic has become significantly more powerful since Ellis originally developed it. I want you to stay with me through this entire breakdown, because at the 8-minute mark, I am going to show you exactly how the use cases that did not exist when Ellis developed this framework, tokenization, AI to AI machine payments, domestic instant payments, change the institutional liquidity math in a way that makes the original targets look conservative rather than aggressive. But first, let us establish what the Shane Ellis theory actually says, because most people have heard a version of it that strips out the mechanism and leaves only the number. The core thesis is this: the price of XRP is not ultimately determined by its circulating supply in the way that traditional crypto market cap analysis calculates. It is determined by the amount of liquidity required for institutional transactions to flow through XRP efficiently at the volumes institutions need to move. When large financial institutions use XRP for high-value cross-border settlements, the price needs to be high enough to provide the liquidity bridge those transactions require without creating destabilizing volatility on the way through. The banking sector and the IMF have both stated publicly that they want stability and trust in any settlement system they adopt. The Ellis framework holds that at a certain point, the institutional participants who need XRP to function as their settlement asset will establish a set price that reflects those liquidity requirements, rather than retail speculation. That mechanism is what makes the Ellis framework so different from conventional crypto price targets, and it is why the numbers it produces look so different from anything the retail market is used to seeing. Now let us talk about what the original Ellis framework produced, and why the 2026 version of this math produces different numbers. The original theory placed XRP at $500 or more based on cross-border payment volumes and liquidity requirements as they existed when the framework was developed. But here is the critical update that changes those numbers dramatically for the current environment. When Ellis developed this framework, tokenization was not part of the conversation. XRP being used for domestic payments was not on the table. Micropayments infrastructure was not being built. AI to AI machine value transfer was not even a concept in the space. Today, in 2026, XRP is being positioned simultaneously for cross-border institutional settlement, domestic instant payments, micropayments infrastructure, and machine-to-machine value transfer between AI systems. Each of those additional use cases adds another layer of liquidity demand on top of the original cross-border payment thesis. The $500 original Ellis framework, updated for everything we know today about XRP's expanded deployment landscape, points toward a significantly different institutional liquidity price point. But let us not focus on a specific number. Let us focus on the mechanism, because understanding the mechanism is what matters for rational conviction. The mechanism works like this. Every use case that requires XRP as a bridge asset or settlement layer creates demand for XRP liquidity at price levels sufficient to handle the transaction volume without volatility disruption. Cross-border institutional settlement requires one level of liquidity depth. Domestic instant payments requires another level. Micropayments infrastructure requires another. AI to AI machine transactions, which could run at volumes that dwarf current payment flows, require another. Stack all of these liquidity requirements together, and the price level required to support all of them simultaneously is a function of math, not speculation. Now let us talk about what has changed in 2026 that makes this mechanism more concrete than it was when Ellis originally published the framework. First, the Clarity Act has cleared the Senate Banking Committee 15-9 with bipartisan support. This is the legal framework that permanently classifies XRP as a digital commodity under CFTC oversight, removing the regulatory uncertainty that has been the primary institutional adoption barrier. When the July 4th presidential signature delivers that legal permanence, the compliance departments that have been evaluating XRP adoption get the certainty they need to deploy at scale. Second, the ETF infrastructure is already built and accumulating. Cumulative XRP spot ETF inflows have reached $1.374 billion before the Clarity Act has even passed the full Senate. Standard Chartered projects $4 to $8 billion in additional ETF inflows after enactment. Third, the real-world utility evidence is no longer theoretical. MasterCard is settling credit card transactions on the XRP ledger right now in production testing. Bitnomial has accepted XRP as margin collateral in CFTC-regulated derivatives. Binance has natively integrated RLUSD on the XRP ledger. ODL is live in 90 countries processing real cross-border payments. The Ellis framework requires institutional liquidity demand to drive price to levels that support settlement volume. And in 2026, that institutional liquidity demand is no longer a projection. It is a measurable and growing reality. Now let us talk about tokenization, because this is the use case that most dramatically expands the Ellis math beyond its original parameters. The tokenization market is projected to reach $31 trillion by 2030, representing the digitization of real-world assets including equities, bonds, real estate, commodities, and alternative investments onto blockchain rails. The XRP ledger was purpose-built for institutional tokenization. Its native DEX, its atomic swap capability, its settlement finality in 3 to 5 seconds, its CFTC-regulated commodity status, all position XRPL as a primary infrastructure layer for the tokenization market. When $31 trillion of real-world assets move onto tokenization rails, and when XRPL captures even a fraction of that settlement volume, the institutional liquidity requirements that the Ellis framework describes are not hypothetical. They are mathematically inevitable. The JP Morgan and MasterCard tokenized treasury settlement on the XRP ledger that was completed in May of 2026 is not an isolated pilot. It is a proof of concept for a $31 trillion market. Now, let us talk about the AI dimension, because this is the use case that Ellis updated his framework to include, and that most people in the community have not fully processed. AI systems are increasingly operating autonomously, making decisions, executing tasks, and transacting with each other without human intermediation. As these systems scale, they require payment rails that can process high volumes of microtransactions between machines in real time. XRP's 3 to 5 second settlement, its sub-cent transaction costs, and its programmable nature make it a natural infrastructure layer for AI to AI value transfer. The volume of AI to AI transactions that could flow through XRP rails as artificial intelligence systems become more autonomous is not bounded by the same constraints that human payment volumes face. Machines do not sleep, do not take weekends off, and do not require the same friction that human payment systems accommodate. If AI to AI transaction volumes scale to even a fraction of what technical analysts project, the liquidity requirements they create at the XRP layer represent a demand driver that the original Ellis framework did not include. Now let us connect the Ellis mechanism to the supply picture that is assembling in 2026. Exchange reserves have dropped from 3.76 billion XRP to approximately 1.66 billion XRP since October 2025. That is a 56% decline in liquid supply in under 8 months. Whale wallets controlling 68.5% of circulating supply are holding their positions in private custody. The mid-tier wallet count has reached an all-time high of 332,000. The entities that understand the Ellis mechanism are not waiting for the price to reflect the institutional liquidity requirements before positioning. They are positioning at current levels, because they understand that when the demand requirements described by the Ellis framework arrive, the supply available to absorb them has been systematically compressed. The Ellis mechanism does not work in isolation from the supply picture. It works through it. Institutional liquidity demand arriving into a supply that has been compressed by 56%. With 68.5% of circulating supply locked in private custody, produces price discovery that is faster and more violent than either factor alone could generate. Now I want to address something directly, because this community deserves a rational voice on the Ellis framework and what it actually claims. David Schwartz has been consistent about speculative price targets. The conspiracy theories that claim specific prices are secretly guaranteed or that government deals will force XRP to a specific level are almost always wrong. The Ellis framework is not a guarantee. It is a mechanism. It describes the relationship between institutional liquidity requirements and XRP price, not a specific price that will be reached by a specific date. What makes the framework valuable is not the number it produces, it is the logic it reveals about how institutional settlement demand connects to asset price through the liquidity mechanism. And in 2026, the evidence that institutional settlement demand for XRP is building is not speculative. It is visible in ETF inflows, in ODL corridor expansion, in MasterCard's XRPL production testing, in Bitnomial's margin collateral acceptance, in the Clarity Act's committee passage. Now, I want to talk about what most people in this community are getting wrong right now. XRP is trading near $1.45. The institutional liquidity demand that the Ellis framework describes is building through real-world utility evidence. The supply is compressed by 56%. And the retail market is watching a sideways chart, waiting for a green candle. The entities that have locked 68.5% of circulating supply into private custody have already done the Ellis math. They have already calculated the relationship between institutional liquidity requirements and the compressed supply picture. They are not waiting for the price to reflect the mechanism before positioning. They are positioning because they understand the mechanism. The retail market will validate the Ellis framework after the price moves. The entities in private custody are validating it now by where they are placing their capital. So let us zoom out and see the complete picture assembling right now. Shane Ellis institutional liquidity mechanism, price determined by settlement demand, not circulating supply. Original cross-border framework now expanded to include tokenization, domestic payments, micropayments, and AI-to-AI machine transactions. $31 trillion tokenization market targeted for XRPL. MasterCard JP Morgan tokenized treasury settled on XRPL in May 2026. ODL live in 90 countries. Clarity Act advancing toward July 4th presidential signature, removing compliance uncertainty. Cumulative ETF inflows $1.374 billion, with $4 to $8 billion projected post-enactment. Exchange reserves down 56% since October 2025. Whale wallets, 68.5% of circulating supply. Mid-tier wallets, all-time high 332,000. Bitnomial, Binance, SEC, MasterCard, Fidelity, and Coinbase all positioned around XRP infrastructure. The Ellis mechanism is not a price prediction. It is a description of the relationship between institutional liquidity requirements and the asset that provides them. And in 2026, the evidence that those requirements are building is no longer speculative. If this analysis changed how you were thinking about the Shane Ellis framework and what the updated 2026 version of the math actually means for XRP, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the move.